是的，是的，对，我在英国里。好，再见。You know, if there's one question to get asked more than any other, more even than what would be the worst place to walk a dinosaur, that question would have to be, Mark, why go to the UK to do photography when you can bring the spirit of England right here to the suburbs of Shanghai? Well, today we're going to try and answer that question. Now, I've already spoken at length about the weirdness and wonder of China in a previous video. Don't worry, you won't have seen it. Clocking in at an hour long, it's like Cloud Atlas, just without the cinematography, pacing, script or acting, but even more pretentious. The fact is, China is a diverse and fascinating country, made even more so when witnessed through Western eyes. Well, strap yourself in for another odyssey through oddness as I return to my British roots, only in an outer suburb of Shanghai rather than the green and pleasant land of England. I can only guess William Blake never made it further north than Coventry. But yes, let's climb into our chariot of fire and fly away from London to Songjiang, China, to see how the Chinese interpret that notion of the quintessentially English town in their creation of Thames Town, a suburban development built between 2004 and 2006 as part of Shanghai's urban expansion through its One City, Nine Towns initiative. I had my Nikon Z6 and my 24 to 200mm lens, basically my most utilitarian photographic setup. Honestly, I didn't see the point in carrying kit that would render the scene in all its traditional beauty. I had my film gear, but shooting film in a place like this is like dressing a piglet in a bonnet and putting it in a pram. It just doesn't make sense. So, let's expose Thames Town with all that clinical austerity that megapixels bring us to give us a sense of what kind of place I'd landed in. Hello. How are you, mate? Hello. And of course, all towns erect statues to those great founders of their ideals, sensibilities, and those things that keep them on the moral path. And here, obviously, we have a tribute to Harry Potter. Oh, I like you. Can I take you home? How can I remove the distractions here so that all I see is trees and not buildings? I don't think that's going to happen. And of course, London is famed for its flamingos. And this must be Harry Potter's apartment. And of course, nothing does say England, like the hammer and sickle. I think I might have seen this outside of Buckingham Palace, maybe. This does not look very English to me, but what would I know? And yes, here I am in Songjiang district. Let's see what I can do to capture that silver ball. On any opportunity for a selfie. They love a sphere in Songjiang, Shanghai, and I love a little alliteration too. And look, I don't know about you, but Thames Town seems a weird mix. It's not like it's the first fake European town built in China. If you go just a couple of hours south to Hangzhou, there's a fake Paris, complete with Eiffel Tower and Champs-Élysées, so you can experience bad weather and bad food in fake London, and then catch the high-speed train to Tianducheng and experience the equally bad weather and worse manners of a fake Paris, though maybe the food will be a little bit better. Look, these were labelled ghost towns when they were first constructed, but while they've been slow to fill, and there's definitely been a flattening of the real estate market and construction industry in China, over the years people have actually moved into Thames Town. It's basically a residential suburb, but with some specific features to attract local tourists. Even though it's called Thames Town, the design of the area is informed by a few British cities, including Chester and Liverpool in the north, as well as London. Well, I grew up within a few kilometres of both Chester and Liverpool, so you'd think that all that familiarity would register with me. Well, not so much. Now, this is a photography channel, not an urban design or cultural theory one, though don't get me wrong, I'm happy to share my lack of expertise across a broad range of disciplines. But it did make me think about this strange melange of Chinese and European influence in the same place. In a way, it makes a lot of sense for Shanghai to have a Thames Town. Following the 19th century Opium Wars, countries like the US, France, and the UK had their own settlements in Shanghai, and it has always been the most international of Chinese cities, with these European concessions building the urban character of the city as it developed. So arguably, Europe is part of the fabric of Shanghai, and if you wander through the Bund area, most notable is the neo-Gothic, Art Deco, and Baroque architecture that was popular in Europe during the pre-communist period. I think what makes Thames Town different though is its attempt to create a facsimile of a traditional English town in the early 21st century. China has rapidly grown and flourished as a confident country with its own character, though the spread of that growth has definitely contributed something to the monotony of the urban landscape. Thames Town was designed to be the antidote to that, to create a restful break from the monolithic compounds that constitute Chinese urban living, though of course with the ridiculously high price of square meterage in Songjiang, let alone central Shanghai, those quaint British houses do come at a cost. And there are enough things that just aren't very European at all too. The civic centre is 100% the Sino-utopian ideal, while arguably the semicircular structure is reminiscent of a Roman square or perhaps the crescent at Bath. The bland municipal tiling that covers just about every public building in China is there, along with a few domes and spheres to try and make the place look aspirationally futuristic. But there is enough recognisable Britishness on show. Even if Harry Potter is as fake as the town itself, a romanticised notion of an England that may never have even existed, or if it did, It's a somewhat rose-filtered, but still potentially nefarious depiction of a malignant class system swapping out muggles for commoners and wizards for the inbred upper class. But hey, I digress, and let's try and sidestep these elitist transphobic potholes that make up just about every J.K. Rowling tweet over the last few years. Wandering through the simulacroscape of Thames Town, it did make me wonder though, if it is trying to create a copy of an English town in Songjiang, well, what is it trying to actually imitate? What are the characteristics of the quintessentially English town? Rather than relying on my own personal experience and the collective unconscious of my Anglo-Celtic heritage, I decided to consult the expert, ChatGPT. First signs were good. OpenAI warns that it can be several years out of date, and really, what's more English than that? Once you start to see the results, then it's clear that the architects must have travelled to the future to bottle that AI formula for the perfect English town. Because, as you'll see, there's no shortage of quaint historical buildings, even if they're all constructed between 2004 and 2006. And while the place has certainly aged, it's more shabby millennial than quaint historical. But there is a church and there are gardens and greens, or at least some threadbare astroturf, as you'll see later. So let's actually then, yes, return to Thames Town and play spot the English cliche as I try to navigate this uncanny valley. And then maybe we'll come back to reality and actually talk a little bit about photography.
And another Instagram versus reality moment. Now, I don't know which Diana this is. I assume it's Princess Diana, although the photo on the wall looks suspiciously like Audrey Hepburn. Don't look at the second, F8. Wait for these people to move, and go. This is the Bedknobs and Broomsticks version of Thames Town, less the Harry Potter. Now you do just have to wonder, what is that growing out of? But hey, give me a bit of minimalism. A church steeple rising out of the rooftops. Should we go a bit more abstract again? Not abstract, but close up at least. I mean, I know we're supposed to be in Thames Town, but why does that look suspiciously like we're in southern Germany? use some of that telephoto compression to give us stacked layers of buildings. That might actually work good in black and white. Very cool depiction of a guy fixing a roof. I wonder if 200mm will get me close enough. Or maybe close enough. More of that beautiful natural lawn. They just don't grow it like they grow it here, do they, anywhere else? Reality versus Instagram again. Yeah, that's interesting, but let's be real. That's really interesting. As it keep going, you go. I get these symmetry. Okay. Logically grouped, beautifully separated. That's it, perfect. Thank you for moving. That just gets it even better. Perfectly grouped, evenly separated. I like this shot. Don't move. I don't know why I say that, you're not listening to me. And it's amazing how we can have at least 3 or 4 weddings all going on at the same time, and yet the church is closed. I wish you could get a bit further back. That's it, further back, further back, further back. Yeah, that'll do. I like that shot. You know, it doesn't have, I've got to be able to see them, man. You're in my way. I know you're the photographer. But, freaking, that'll do. That shall do. Not a little bit crowded at all. Oh, look at you, James Bond. And sorry, but I hate to be a pedant, but there was no movie 007.
So what did we learn other than perhaps I missed my calling as a wedding photographer? And hey, you may as well have a fake photographer for your fake wedding portraits. Well, I think it's fair to say, yeah, this ain't England. So what is it, and what is my own relationship with it? Since in the end, as photographers, the things that capture our attention are the things that either are recognizable or recognizably different from our own frame of reference. And if there is a photographic point to be made in this meandering narrative, I think that's it. Photography is often about the familiar and the unfamiliar. Often we're drawn to those things that are different, the things that make us stop and ask questions. This is certainly not the England that I know. I grew up among the Victorian red brick of Liverpool, and my England will always be Martin Parr's depiction of New Brighton as the last resort. To me, England is a grim, miserable place, brutalised through several generations of economic decline, underemployment, social inequity and ideological division. Yes, now that they've sandblasted the soot from the buildings of Liverpool, it has had a facelift, but it's not the same thriving port that I was born into or the slumping city I left in the 1980s. It's kind of a museum piece, locked in aspic. It's only when you leave the exhibit that you start to understand how people are still eking out their lives in relation to it. Walk a few kilometres outside the city centre and you start to see a bit of the Merseyside I remember. New Brighton is still the faded photocopy of an English seaside resort, and as my kids said when they went back to visit it in 2019, Dad, you really did live in a shithole. Lady Diana, Harry Potter and James Bond aren't my England. They're English in the way that honey soy chicken is Chinese. I mean, it's a projection of a corrupted sense of what others think England is. Of course, to Shanghainese people, Thames Town is probably no weirder than Chinatowns in our own cities are, though arguably there's still a bit more authenticity to those, at least until you read the restaurant menu and realise just like Thames Town was created by English architects for a Chinese sensibility, the complexity and diversity of Chinese food has been dumbed down to shit with sauce on it, served with fried rice for a European palate. In Perth, we have our own London Court, a much smaller scale laneway built to resemble a medieval English street, and equally strange if it weren't at heart just a shopping street constructed in the 1930s by a mining entrepreneur. So, Thames Town is at once familiar and unfamiliar, a blend of China and Europe, of real and fake, of romantic notions of gentility and chivalry, and the grotty reality of a 20-year-old suburb that could do with a bit of a makeover. And to me, that's what makes it fascinating. Bear in mind that while Shanghai is a global city, Songjiang is distinctly on the outskirts, and I could go days without seeing a single Caucasian face. So Thames Town is its own little Truman Show, and I think that they are the things that most intrigue me about it. As for the Nikon Z6 and the 24 to 200mm lens, well, this is a great travel companion. Comparatively small and light for a super zoom. It gives you the range that you need for just about everything that emerges on the street. And while I wouldn't say it's discreet, it's not like I was the only person there with a camera. I've had this lens for a while now, and I'm starting to become a bit more aware of the limitations of it, and the biggest of them, honestly, is its flatness. It renders things sharp enough throughout the zoom range. It's usable at all apertures, though at its widest it's f4 and squeezes down to a tiny 6.3 at the long end, so it's always a compromise between shutter, aperture, and ISO. But like all super zooms, its complex construction means lots of elements, lots of flaws to correct, and the result is that it takes you where you need to go like a bus does, but it doesn't make for the most fun ride. I think the worst things that I saw was an occasional glow around the edges at the long end and a tendency for those things in the scene that are just a bit out of focus to look a little bit jittery. So if we're going to fall back on the English analogies, there's some mushy peas to go with your crispy fried cod. But ultimately, it gets the job done. And if I'm to be honest, this is probably responsible for many of my best shots over the last year or two simply because of its versatility. It just tends not to leave my camera that often. So let's pick 6 keepers from the digital dross, and of course the standouts are going to be the weirder ones of the bunch. The ones that seem familiar at first, but cause you to stop and second guess on a longer look. Of course, goldfish are about as Chinese as they come, so to help inject a bit of Englishness in the scene, I had to insert myself Vivian Maier style into this guo hua. I like this one because the tiling suits the subject in terms of colour and composition. Having the human element out of focus makes it more iconic to me, and I do like some geometry, and so the spire peeking over the rooftops is a definite entry. As for the others, well, who doesn't love a fake wedding? In a sense, these photos sum up everything about Thames Town to me. While I couldn't stage these shots, obviously, I did try to take some really formal compositions, which I think adds to that sense of artifice, with all of the photographing families spaced around the area in a fixed formation. But I also like the ones that are a bit more real and intimate, those genuine moments among the decaying Disneyland that is Thames Town. And really, isn't that what it is? We all hanker after something a bit different to lift us from the monotony of our lives, and I think it's fair to say that China has created its fair amount of monotonous urban architecture. But even in a country as crimped by Confucianism and constrained by communism as China is, it's still a wellspring of individual hopes, dreams, and aspirations. China has opened up over the last few decades with an urban generation having grown up on Disney and KFC, and where there's a Starbucks on every corner. Thames Town is a product of that desire for life to be a little bit special, a little bit exotic, a little bit individual, even if that individuality means dressing up in the same wedding outfits and having their photos taken like everyone else milling around the church on a Sunday morning. And who am I to question their romantic interpretation of Englishness? Let them live in their facsimile of the Cotswolds. Life is brutal and mundane, and we all deserve to project ourselves into some other place that, if not quite real, is at least an idealized analogy of an imagined better world. Later.